Sally, and welcome to this week's Craft the Story episode. Crazy cats just ran in here really, really fast. For this week's Craft the Story episode, I am doing a Q&A. I asked for some questions on Instagram on Monday and got some good questions. So I'm just gonna dive in, and you'll see there's some, I would call them buckets of topics. Some family stuff, some general life stuff, lots of memory keeping questions. So I'm gonna try to get through as many of them as I can here in the time allotted. And we'll do this again another time. I think this is a fun way to tackle some of your questions. And some of the questions I think are actually gonna be really great future Craft the Story topics. So grab a cup of coffee, whatever your beverage of choice is. I'm doing coffee right now, and let's dive in. Well, for those of you guys that are Story Kit subscribers, you have heard me talk a little bit more about this. I started doing Project Life back in 2010. I think 2010 is the first year that I did it, and I did it every year up until this year. Last year I did about half a year in 2020, and I had started doing it monthly. I'm still working through that one, so I plan to finish out 2020 monthly, as I fit it into the different projects I have going on. I'm also in the Story Kit classroom working on finishing 2016. That was a year that I hadn't finished, and at that point I was doing it weekly. My general feeling towards the project for me personally right now is it's not what I want to be focusing on. And one of the things that I've learned over many years of doing this is that the best thing for me is to focus on the things that feel like they're filling me up. And that weekly or monthly documentation right now just doesn't feel like, it's not the main thing that I want to be focusing on. So I'm focusing more on individual stories right now. Some of them are right now stories, some of them are, yesterday kinds of stories. A lot more, I would say, traditional or outside of the page protector memory keeping. Those are the things that have been interesting to me lately. I finished up content for Hello Story 3, and that class is happening now. And in that one, I did a lot of mixed media using some of the jelly plate prints that I made last week for Craft the Story. Just feeling like that's what feels like the kind of stories that I want to be telling are outside of that very specific weekly or monthly format of Project Life and outside of page protectors. So if you're listening to this right now and that's totally what you're into right now, you got to go with that. Like, stick with that inspiration. And if you need more inspiration, I have literally years of weekly Project Life inspiration on my blog. I also have a workshop called Storytelling with Project Life that might be something that you are interested in. So that's on the classes section of my website. Will I ever go back to it again? It's totally possible. Right now I don't feel like I miss it. I'm still having fun telling everyday life kinds of stories, which I was doing before I started Project Life, and I will be doing as I continue on in the future. There was somebody specifically asked, do I plan to do a Project Life album for 2021? I don't plan to do one this year. So it's possible that in 2022 I may jump back on and do that documenting again, but I don't have any plans for 2021. Here's another question that was related to Project Life, and this one was, how do you journal on older Project Life spreads when you no longer remember the story? So that's a great question. So I do a couple things. Number one is I almost always look back in my Instagram account and see what kinds of stories I was telling at that particular point in time. Oftentimes the photos that I've used in Project Life, I also shared on Instagram. And so there's story sparks that are, either I will copy and paste that all of the journaling that I wrote on the photo, or it will spark a story. The other thing for me is when I'm going back in project life, the photos, especially in past years, so like when I'm working on 2016, it's the photos that are sparking the stories for me. So I look at the photos and I have a reaction. Maybe it's feelings based, maybe it's some facts about why that picture was taken or what was happening at that particular point in time. And that gives me words, right? That gives me words to include there. I also think, and I don't have any problem with when I'm working on, telling stories from like 2016 is my main example, because those are the project life spreads that I've been doing in the Story Kit classroom. I will also sometimes write from the perspective of today. So I'm documenting that week in there. I have all the photos in, and sometimes I will write on journaling cards like, oh, I remember how I felt at this particular point in time, with the perspective that I have, 5 years later now. There's not a right or a wrong for that at all. And also sometimes we're just gonna remember, things are gonna stick out more in our memory than other times. But I think that knowing, like, going back and working on past projects like that always helps inform the kinds of documenting that I do right now. So continuing to share on Instagram is a great way for me to highlight or save stories that I can use in future memory keeping projects. Another project life related question was just the direct question of why did I stop doing project life? And I think I kind of answered this in my previous response there, but mainly for me, I just felt it started feeling more like a chore than something that I was enjoying. And I think for me, going back to diving a little bit deeper into specific stories, doing more full page layouts, that was simply bringing me more joy, really is kind of the honest answer. Okay, so here's a funny one. Somebody asked, if you had to be a scrapbooking supply, what item would you be? I think I would probably be a pen, some kind of a pen. Like, that feels like that makes sense to me. Something that I could draw with, or a tool that is used in that way. Yeah. That or adhesive, right? Sticking all the stuff together. That sounds kind of fun. All right, there are a number of questions related to albums, looking back at past albums, and I want to make sure that you guys know that I do have a couple of videos here on YouTube talking about album organization and how I put some of those things together. One of the questions was, how often do you go back and look at the albums and read the words? I honestly don't do that very often. These days I go back in and look at them when I'm looking for something specific. I'm looking for examples to share in a class. I'm looking for ways that maybe I've done something in the past and that I want to either replicate, or I want to be reminded about how I used to do things in a certain way that maybe I don't do anymore. I don't spend a lot of time going back in and rereading them unless it is for a project. Like if I'm filming, I'm going back through some December dailies and I'm filming those, then I often get sucked in a positive way and read the words and get that added benefit of being able to see, literally see all the work that I've done over the years and all the stories that I have actually told. I know many of you guys, there's a video, I think one of the earliest Craft the Story videos, where I talk a little bit about my philosophy and the reason why I scrapbook and do memory keeping. And so much of it for me is in the right now piece, like the benefits that I get for myself in doing it right now, the things that I learn about myself, the way that I am able to understand my life better. That benefit happens for me while I'm doing it. So it's during the process. there is an added benefit, I think, that comes from when you go back in and you revisit the stories that you told, and you revisit and see how you were thinking about things at different points in time versus how you think about them today. You know, all of those sorts of things. So yeah, I don't really spend a lot of time going back through them just to see what they look like. How does your family interact with your scrapbooks, and how does or does it affect what you document? So I can honestly tell you, I can't remember the last time that someone came in here and wanted to look at projects or albums. So our family structure, just in case you don't know, we are a blended family. My husband Aaron and I met in the end of 2012 and have been together ever since. He and his 3 children moved in 2016. We got married in 2017. So we've got 5 kids total here from the ages of 12 to 19, and they're here every other week. So they go to their other houses on the other weeks, and then they're here on the opposite weeks. But honestly, they really don't come in here very often unless they are asking questions about other things that they want answers to, and they will see things that are out on my table that I'm in the middle of working on or have been photographed, and often they will pick them up and read them or look at them. But it's not something that they interact with on a daily basis at all. It just isn't. And I think, you know, there have been previous times where people have been more interested in looking at one point or another. None of that matters to me, honestly, in the least bit. Like, it doesn't make me feel bad that nobody's looking at them, again, because of the reason that I am doing them for myself. Like, I am the one that is getting great joy out of telling these stories, whether they are stories about myself or stories about, you know, my perspective of what's happening with different kids or what has happened, all those kinds of things. It's not important to me that they are looking at them. I kind of figure, and I talk about this in another video, that at some point, if they want to look, they're all here and they can read them, they can check them out, they can do a deep dive into them at any time that they would want to, but it doesn't bum me out in the least that they don't. How often do I revisit old projects, and is that nostalgia generally a positive or a negative for me? And I liked the phrasing of that question. So again, you know, I don't spend a lot of time going back into those albums until the new project comes up each year. So like with Week in the Life, I will probably pull some of those projects out and I will flip back through them to look a little bit closer at some of the things that I did last year or the year before. That will inform some of the choices that I make this year. Do I want to, you know, kind of what's my goal? Do I want to include more words? Do I want to include fewer words? Is there some particular pictures that I want to take? So I use that often as information to make decisions going forward about projects. I would say nostalgia for me is generally a positive. I am not a, well, I'll say this and then, I don't know, people might want to argue, that I don't feel like I am generally like a super sentimental person. But I say that out loud and then I'm like, what am I saying? Of course I am sentimental. Like, of course, I love stories. Like, if you love stories, you're probably sentimental. So that, I think what I don't love, I don't know, that's a good question. What I do love though is I love that I can go back and I can look at past projects, especially in the ways that my family life has changed over the years, that I can go back and I can see, you know, what it was like when Chris was here and what did we do, especially related to Week in the Life. Like, what was life like at that particular point in time? What were the rhythms of our day like then? You know, at that point in time when Simon and Anna were really small, and then, you know, comparing that to today, I love the compare and contrast, even if that's only happening in my head. Like, I definitely get positive vibes and value from that. For me, when I look back at all of the projects and the stories that I told, you know, from my first marriage, that I do not have an overwhelming feeling of sadness or regret or anything like that. I just feel thankful. I feel thankful that you know, that was a piece of my life experience. I have learned so much from that entire experience. Those are the overwhelming feelings that I have when I look back at those projects, and at the times when I told those harder stories too, or I included references to them. Like, I'm really thankful that I did that, and that informs the choices that I make going forward too. Have any of your children become interested in the art of photography and or storytelling? Yes and no. None of the kids here are making scrapbooks of themselves in the way that we, probably our community thinks of as scrapbooks. But the girls specifically love making videos. They like taking pictures. They like writing down captions for the social media platforms that they participate on. Lots and lots of videos from them especially. So I see that as their method of documentation. Simon also uses Instagram, and he, is on and off, and I always love when I get to see stories that he tells on there. And same with the other two boys too. They, I know they all take pictures, and I think that that's just a part of, the access to tech devices. But none of them are doing it in a crafty way, the way that I approach it, which is totally fine. I'm here if they want to do that. Do you worry that your kids will read your work, like your personal stories in one little word or difficult stories? No, I don't worry at all. In fact, I look forward to the day or the time when they read something where I have told my personal truth of a story, and we get to have a conversation about that. Like, I think that personal narrative writing or personal storytelling is really, really important, and I really value that for myself. And so for them to see that modeled is an important thing for me, and it's an important value. But it's not something where I'm like, oh, come read where I have talked about such and such and such and such and such in my one little word album, this struggle or that struggle, which is where I document a lot of those more personal stories. I'm not throwing out the invitation, but I'm also looking forward to them having the ability to read that in the future if they choose to do that as a, potentially as a method for getting to know me in a different way. How have your photos and albums held up over the years, and how do you minimize wear and still enjoy them? I think that mine, whenever I pull out any of the albums that I have here in the office, I feel like most of them have held up really well. Mine, the main wear and tear on my projects is when I take them to events. And obviously we haven't had an event in a while, but when it's safe to do so, we have an event here called Story Camp, and we've done a couple other ones, and I've, taught projects and at events around the country and internationally. So I've taken a lot of them with me. They've traveled with me. They travel with me just even locally here over to Story Camp. And that is the main wear and tear on those projects, is other people, flipping through them, which I love. I love giving people the opportunity to do that because you get to see how real it is. Most of the time you guys are viewing my projects in this flat medium, right, of video or image, and it's just not the same as getting to touch and hold somebody's projects. And that's a really important piece of those in-person events for me. So some of the pieces that have fallen apart, or things that are falling apart, because there are some things that have fallen apart. A lot of in those, the small mini books that I did early on many years ago, different pieces falling off. But that's kind of from, I'm not wrapping them in tissue paper or wrapping them in some sort of paper and putting them away nicely. I throw them into a tub. I pull out the tub when we go to the event. But my albums, I think those have held up a little bit better. I think that is just part of, the archival issue for me is not ever something that I'm really thinking about super intentionally. I am, again, doing this more for the joy and the lessons learned and all of this, the process piece for me. So if they last 50 years, if they last 10 years, if they last, months, probably not months, but years. That sounds good for me. Keeping things out of sunlight, I think that's always kind of important. So here in my office, my albums are all, you know, in shelves, closed up. So when I pull them out, most of the time, even the photos that I've been printing at home for many, many years now, using a variety of different printers, most of them have held up pretty good. I mean, there's a few that are discolored for one reason or another, but even then I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Do you have a family album or all individuals? If so, is it yearly or do you just gradually add to it? So the way that I have things set up right now is that I have small individual albums, so 6x8 albums. Each one of the kids has at least one of those, and I will add stories to them as I tell them. I also have a 12x12 2020 2021 album that I am adding to as I tell stories in that size. So that's like a 12x12, I would call it a family or an annual album. And I also have a 2020 or 2021 6x8 album because I do a lot in that size too. So two, you know, a 12x12 album and a 6x8 album that are just for any stories that I tell about this year. Any stories I tell about 2021 that are general, you know, not about a specific kid, but more about just our family life or about me. I put those all into there. Over the years, I've done it in a variety of different ways. I'm pretty sure I have a video about that too, that you can check out if you just look at the Craft the Story series of videos there. You know, I have some albums, some 12x12 albums that are just about me when I was a kid. I have some 12x12 albums that are stories of Chris and I when we were married and before we were married. I have 12x12 albums that are, or I have a 12x12 album from the Yesterday and Today workshop. I have a 12x12 album that is an Italy trip. I'm kind of just looking at them. And then I have a variety of different Project Life albums. Some of those 12x12 albums were, you know, there were 3 per year for a while when I was doing it weekly. Then I got them down into 2 albums when I was doing it weekly. And then I've got the monthly 9x12. So a wide variety of different ways that I have stored things over the years. And one of the things that you'll hear me say in that video about album organization is that I don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about all of that. I mainly want my albums to act as homes, and I want them to be homes for my projects. I want my projects to go inside of an album, and that's kind of my general approach, but definitely check out that video for more on that. When just starting out, how do you determine which album your kid family to use? If I was just starting out right now and I knew that I was going to be making, you know, 6x8 was kind of generally the size that I wanted to be working in, I would just get a couple of those albums and I would, you know, start off and be like, here's 2021, and any stories I tell about 2021 are going to go into the 6x8 album. From there, you'll kind of probably get a sense of who am I telling stories about the most? Does that person need their own album? Do I need multiple albums for multiple things? Or, you know, can just 1 or 2 albums be enough to as a holding place for these different kinds of stories? That's what I would think about when I first started, or if I was encouraging you when you were first starting. In this creative adventure of memory keeping and scrapbooking, there are lots of opportunities for stumbling blocks that keep us away from actually getting stories told. It can be purchasing products, it can be having too many products, it can be worrying about whether or not you have the right album organization, it could be, you know, fear about telling your stories, it could be you know, you don't have a flow for working with your pictures, or you feel like every single picture has to have a scrapbook page. That's not true. There's lots of ways that we can get mentally caught up in this that keep us from actually just typing up stories or writing down stories or getting a couple of pictures printed and adding some words to it. There are so many different ways that you can approach this, and that in and of itself can be overwhelming. So my biggest suggestion to people is to just start. Just start with a photo, start with some words, copy other people, like look for inspiration online, go to Pinterest, look on my website. I have probably thousands of layouts that I've done over the years. Pick one that you like the style of, and it doesn't have to be from me, right? From somebody else. Something that you like the style of, and emulate that or recreate that as to the best of your ability. And by doing that, that's kind of how you learn, right? You learn that, oh, I like having a single full page photo as part of this project, or I like having 20 different 2x2 photos paired all together here. And then as you go forward in the future, you can continue to test things out and learn and grow in terms of your own storytelling abilities, and you'll become more and more comfortable over time. And I definitely think it's one of those things where the more you do it, the more you find your own voice in in photography, you find your voice in your writing, and you find your voice in your own design style. What is the largest order you've ever made of crafty supplies? I think this is a hilarious question, and I honestly wish that I knew the answer. I'm guessing that it probably, well, it was probably on 2 Peas in a Bucket when that website existed many years ago. That's gonna be my guess. I order from scrapbook.com. I just placed an order yesterday, I think. So I do order things from them. That's where, you know, I get 12x12 albums from them. So some of those orders have been bigger, but it must have been back in the day on 2 Peas. That would be my guess. And I'm sure it was a couple $100s or something crazy that felt just insane at the time. And yeah, that's a good question. It would be interesting to see if I could actually figure that out. Do I ever worry about the environmental impact of scrapbooking? Yes, I do. I think about it in lots of different ways. I think about it probably more from the product manufacturing standpoint. And so we as a company are trying to make some decisions and change a few things here and there where we can, in terms of the packaging that we use, in terms of the materials that we use. But it's definitely like so one of the things that I'm really trying to do in my own life, and I feel like I've had some good, I've listened to some people talk about this recently, people that are kind of in the less waste community, and talking about how it's never going to be perfect, right? We are never going to be perfect in terms of the amount of waste we produce. I could, you know, compost everything that we eat, which we compost a lot here. And it's still never going to be perfect. So I'm trying to do things in my daily life to offset some of that. And whether that is just trying to make myself feel good or whatever. I mean, it's a complicated issue. But around here we compost. We actually live in a place where we can put our composting food scraps into a bin with our yard waste that gets turned into compost at another facility. I also started a compost pile here in our house, or outside of our house, but we have one of those little bins, and anytime I'm doing any vegetable prep, anything like that, all of the extra stuff gets put in the compost, which for me is great. And I want to get really good at that here because I like gardening so much that I want to have our own compost where I'm not having to buy the compost, but I'm actually being able to use what we create here. In our own home too, we've done lots of things, like we have cloth napkins that we use. They're just in a big basket downstairs by our couch, and then they go into the laundry room after people have used them. Yeah, I think it's you know, finding those spaces in our lives where we can do something different. And in terms of scrapbooking too, I feel like there's so many opportunities to use what we have instead of buying more, or things like making your own paper, right? I had so much fun in Hello Story 3 making my own paper, using the jelly plates like I showed in that video last week, and just using some more things like that versus necessarily purchase products. And I know sometimes that sounds weird because, you know, part of my business is selling products, but I'm always kind of like doing that dance between, you know, wanting to be a responsible citizen of the world, paired with making things available to people, paired with, you know, where are my values at? So I don't have an awesome answer to that. I think that scrapbooking can definitely be something that uses less wasteful sorts of things, you know, especially if you are scrapbooking in some of those more traditional ways of, you know, using ephemera, using the stuff of life, cutting up bags that you receive and using those in your projects. Like, it could be, there's lots of opportunity for that, but at the same time, there is a hell of a lot of plastic. And sometimes that just makes me feel really like I am the embodiment of the emoji with the teeth. Like, that's how it makes me feel. So it's definitely something that's on my mind. Yeah, it's definitely something that I think about. So next question was somebody asking about advice on crafting faster. And she said, I start projects and I give up because I'm discouraged because it's not going fast. You know, when I read that question, one of the things that I think of is, like, does it need to be fast? Like, did somebody tell you that you were supposed to be faster than you are? I get so much enjoyment from taking my time on these projects especially when I can. Sometimes for me, I have to work fast because I have deadlines that I have to meet for one reason or another. But I would really encourage you to kind of embrace the beautiful slowness that can come from the time that it takes to put some of these projects together. And I'd say, especially if you are newer or you're learning or you're trying to figure out your own personal processes, like you're trying to figure out printing photos, whether you are getting it from a developer or whether you're printing them by yourself at home. You know, as you try to figure out all those processes, it can take time. Like, this is a hobby that just takes time. It takes time to edit and or print your photos. It takes time to write your stories. It takes time to establish how you're going to bring those words and photos together. It takes time to actually do the putting together or the bringing together of the words and photos. There are so many different pieces of the process. So I don't necessarily have any advice, I think, on working faster. One of the things that I think that I am good at is that I am a quick decision maker. So I don't spend a lot of time trying to decide, is this the perfect paper to use for this project? I am much more likely to be like, this paper is going to work just fine for this project, so I'm going to move forward. So I would, you know, if you're thinking about that you're going too slow, I would probably check yourself a little bit and say, you know, are you having a hard time making decisions related to the projects that you want to do? Are you having a hard time getting started? You know, are you having a hard time like seeing it through to completion? There's so many different pieces of these processes, and also ways that we get caught up in our heads, thinking that it's supposed to look a certain way or that it's supposed to take a certain amount of time. Or I think those are a lot of the things that we need to work on letting go of too. So related to that then was just like finishing projects, a question about finishing projects, tips for getting it done and time management. I think I'll probably do another video at some point in time, a craft story video about tips for finishing projects. I think that probably deserves its own video. Partly because I think it really depends on you as a person. Like, what's your own personal workflow like? You know, are you somebody that likes the beginning of the process versus you like the completing part of the process? And a lot of that is kind of getting to know yourself. Where are your own pitfalls going to be in the creative process? Which part are you going to get stuck on? And once you know where you're getting stuck, then you get that opportunity to make some different choices along the way. Something that really works for me is having deadlines. You know, having deadlines for when I have to have things done, it motivates me to get things done. Do I have other creative projects that are not work related that you guys don't know about? That would be a no. Pretty much anything that I do that is creative or crafty or anything in that genre gets shared. I think for me, a lot of creative energy right now is actually going into working in my yard, which I do share some about that on Instagram, but I don't have any other like hidden creative projects. There's not any more time available for me to do extra projects. For me right now, you know, the majority of my time, well, not the majority, but like this week, this is a great example of, you know, I think it was a couple weeks ago on a Craft the Story video, I took you behind the scenes and showed what a day in my working life looked like. And on that particular day, I sat at my computer pretty much the majority of the day and did a variety of different tasks. This week here in my office, I have been standing at that table the vast majority of the time and actually creating projects. So there's an ebb and a flow for me in terms of, you know, the kinds of work that I do, but there's really not any extra time for more things, which is totally fine, totally fine. Will I do an online story camp? Somebody wanted to come from Australia. We don't have any plans right now to do an online story camp. Story camp is the in-person event that Katie Jagger and I host here in our hometown. We really value that as an in-person event, so we don't have any plans to do to turn that into an online event. And we probably won't do another one of those until maybe second half of 2022. We're just kind of waiting to see what happens. Okay, biggest piece of advice for someone wanting to start a crafty YouTube channel. I don't feel like any kind of YouTube expert, but what I do know for any sort of sharing or growth building, the biggest tip that I can give is consistency. Consistently showing up. You know, if you say you're gonna do a video, you do the video. If you're gonna do it weekly, you know, figure out some sort of a schedule for yourself. I think if you're just starting, that's a great way to do it, and maybe do a few before you even share the first one so that you've worked ahead a little bit. That's another tip. I think really just having fun with it, you know, and so much of all of this, whether it's video or, you know, creating classes or any of the work related stuff that I do, it has been a learning process, right? I do something, I learn about it through the process of doing it, and then I learn more as I continue on down that path. So a lot of it, I would definitely say consistency. I would say have fun with it. Yeah, consistency is probably the key thing. How do you work from a sketch? So how do you go from a sketch to a final layout? You know, at first I'm like, I don't really work from sketches very often, but sometimes I do. And I know in the new Hello Story 3 workshop that I've been working on, I do sketches. I usually have some sketches before I've made the projects, and then I also make sketches after I make the project. So if they look different, then I will draw a sketch for them. I am really big on the concept of translating ideas. So when you see an inspiration piece, learning how to translate that into a scrapbook page or what could be a scrapbook page. So I like looking at sketches for giving me a jumping off point, right? Giving me, here's this place that you can start. And from there, then you can see where you may go after that, which could be in a number of directions. And oftentimes, even for me, when I start with a sketch, I may veer off the rails and end up doing something different or something that feels like it fits my story better. So I think they're really fun places to start, but they're not, for me, that's not the way that I generally approach it. But that might be a fun topic for another video in the future. What is one story you want to tell, but you really want to tell but haven't yet? So I have lots of lists of stories. I keep most of those in Evernote, which is a note-taking program. I also use the Notes app a little bit more just on my phone too. Both of those I can access from any device. So Evernote just has worked as a holding place for me for stories that I might want to tell in the future. I don't really feel like right now at this very moment I have some burning story that I have been wanting to tell that I haven't told yet. And I think that's just because I do it pretty regularly. So when I have an idea, it usually manifests itself pretty soon in terms of getting it documented. That was actually another question too then, was how or where do you keep your stories or ideas? Yeah, mainly for me, I keep them on the computer or on my phone in a program like Notes or Evernote, where you can access both of those at the same time. I also have sticky notes. I like sticky notes, so I have sticky notes to myself here around my desk. I also use a moleskin notebook that looks like this, that is some project ideas. I started doing this last year, and so this is in conjunction with my Get to Work book. And this has worked really well for me, just for jotting down notes that I might need more space for than I would use in the planner. So sometimes story ideas get written down on here, but most of the time I'm trying to keep them in Evernote or in my Notes app so I can search for those. That makes it really easy for me to be able to do that. I've also seen, we have a blog post that one of our community members did within the last couple of months, where she was sharing how she has a box, like a literal box that has, it's almost like a recipe box. It's like a story recipes, right? Or a box of stories that she wants to tell and notes she's written down. That was really cool. And you can find that by looking back in our blog archives there too. There was a group of questions that came in that were related to designing story kits, or what my design process is for choosing colors, or, you know, just that whole process of design work. And I already have on my list that I will do a craft the story video that just takes a look behind the scenes at what that process looks like. I have a couple of those coming up that are going to be due, I think in the next few weeks, and so I was just planning that I would film that and share that with you guys coming up. So I would look for that in the next probably month or so. So that'll take care of some of the questions that you guys are asking. What software I use to edit videos and record the voiceovers. I'm just using iMovie. It is simple and easy enough for me to use at this time. I might change at a certain point in time, but for right now, I'm really in so many areas of my life trying to choose the simple path. You know, and sometimes with programs and apps, you know, sometimes the choice to move into something else can be really great for your creativity, and it can open up all these other doors, and sometimes it can just be more. So for me, iMovie is working great for that. And for recording voiceovers, I use a program, well, there's a couple different things. I use a program called ScreenFlow to record, if I want to record what's happening on my desktop, you know, on my computer, or I'm doing a tutorial in Photoshop or something like that, I use a program called ScreenFlow. When I am recording audio over top of video, I have this Rode Podcaster microphone. You can see that right there. That's what I use for that. And that is usually, I can do that in iMovie or in ScreenFlow, depending on what I'm working on. Another question that somebody had was about my photo storage. And I think I'll probably do a video about that at some point too. I have a workshop called Lens of Joy, and that talks about my photo taking philosophy, but it also covers editing photos, storing photos, how I organize my photos. I have changed to, let's see, I used to use a program called Aperture as my photo management program. That was an Apple product that they have since they are not supporting that anymore. So I had a choice to either move to Lightroom, which is an Adobe product, or stick with Photos, which is the Apple, the native Apple photo management program. And I went back and forth, and there was like, for years, I said I was just going to move to Lightroom as soon as Aperture is not available anymore, or is not being supported anymore. But then I started thinking about simplicity again, and simplicity for me at this particular point in time was to just stay with Photos, with the Photos program. And so that's what I've been doing now. I think it's been a year that I've just been using Photos, and it's been totally fine for me. I'm still able to organize by folder, which is the way that I like to organize photos, and I do that by month. by month and then by project, because a lot of the things that I have on there are project related images. That has worked really well for me. We also have a couple different backups here. My photos are on an external hard drive, which is backed up via Time Machine, which is the Apple backup, but then I also use another program, which I think the one I'm using now is Crash Plan, if I remember right. Crash Plan is one that I've used for a number of years. I don't know that they're offering individual storage backup anymore, and I know that this is a topic that there's like way more out there probably than I even know anything about, but I do use that as a Crash Plan as a backup for my photos also. So I have a few different backups in place. Do you document private stories? I'm curious if you do that, if it's a thing. I have done a variety of different things over the years, from personal journal writing. I do that most often if I feel like I need to do that. If I have a lot of stuff going on and I'm really needing to get clarity for myself, personal journal writing, like in a journal or even just typing on the computer, getting the stuff out of my head, that's worked really well for me. But I don't have scrapbooks that have stories that I haven't shared. So anything that I have done within a scrapbook has been shared in some way or another in a class or in in some sort of a project. I do have some stories that I have written out or I'm in the process of writing out that I keep in Evernote. And some of those are kind of more personal history things where I'm trying to sort out timelines and I'm trying to figure out, what happened, did this happen before this? Or when I have a specific memory of a certain time, that pops up for me, I try to write those down. Like I like to take advantage of the opportunity, even just to jot down some of the notes I have. So that a lot of that is on the computer.